All right, thanks everybody for coming in and taking an interest in educating yourself. So I'm going to go over the doctrines of liberty. A Bible, we already have a Bible. We have no more need for a Bible. This is an attitude I see a lot in conservatives, that it's the Democrats trampling on the Constitution, not us. I don't need to know it. I already support it. Like it's some kind of document that we just kind of high five. Hey there, high five, Constitution. We believe the Constitution was inspired. May not be 100% perfect, but we do believe it was inspired from God. Now, let me ask you a question though. If the Constitution was written by the hand of God in stone, can it, even if it was 100% perfect, written by the hand of God himself, can it enforce itself? No. It doesn't matter how perfect of a framework we're given, it still requires enforcement. Whose job is it to enforce it? It's our responsibility to enforce it. Now, I like to ask questions as I go along. I find that asking questions and getting us to kind of think, show, we kind of have these recited, memorized answers to certain questions that we hear a lot and stuff. But on a deeper level, there's still misconceptions deep down in our subconscious that we're still believing about our Constitution. Liberty is not just a good principle part of the gospel. When you truly understand it, liberty is God's plan. It's not just part of it. Liberty is the plan of salvation. Let me address this idea further. Cleon Skousen said, freedom plus morality equals liberty. But I asked myself, that's still, it tells us liberty is something higher, but it still doesn't address what liberty is. We know it requires morality, but what is liberty? I answer, liberty is power. Why did God create us? Just throw out any answer. What are your guys' thoughts?
To be like God.
To be like God. What does that mean to you?
To have power.
To have power? So there's some kind of greater reason besides just eating popcorn on his throne watching us mess up, that he created us. Who here is a parent? Why did you have kids?
So they could do our work for us.
Hey, I'm starting to get my 6-year-old to start doing some of my bidding. So we desire that we can work hard to provide a better future or a prosperous future for our children. The same with our Father in heaven. He created us so we could achieve something great. Now, who here hears a lot about how the war in heaven was fought over agency? Well, agency was certainly a huge part of it, but it was a little bit more than that. See, the war in heaven was about the product of agency. It wasn't about agency alone. The thing is, Lucifer, sometimes I think we forget that under Lucifer's deviated plan, he was guaranteeing salvation. So our end goal's not necessarily salvation. We were going to get salvation under Lucifer. What is our end goal? Exaltation. And exaltation versus salvation represents power. We get to be endowed with power by pursuing a path of proper principles. And so the whole idea of the war in heaven was that while agency was a crucial piece of it, it was about the product of having agency or not having agency. That was what the war was about. We want to be effective. So I run an organization called Liberty United. Liberty United was founded because I saw many organizations that were already doing a really good job addressing some of the issues. We see groups that are fighting on the front for health freedom or for elections or trying to clean up schools. And I thought to myself, I feel like something's missing, but it's not a group that needs to address another issue. I feel like there's already plenty of those. We need an organization that will teach constitutional principles. Because again, as conservatives, we like to go high five Constitution, but we can't enforce it if we don't know it. And there's lots of good job of extinguishing fire, but we extinguish a fire and another fire comes up. Nobody's asking the question, why do fires keep coming up in this house? There's something core we're abandoning. The Constitution is a framework. It's a framework that God inspired to protect liberty. And if we want to be effective, we must address the core, not just chase symptoms. Now, it requires action. We need to address some of these issues. We need to be active. But simply being busy is not necessarily effective at something. We need knowledgeable action. Question for you. Who can describe what the American government looks like in perhaps one sentence?
It should look like or what it does?
What it should look like?
Democratic republic.
A republic, okay. In terms of structure, what does that look like?
3 branches that supporting and integrating with each other: legislative, judicial, and executive.
Executive, okay. I appreciate that answer. And it's exactly the answer I get every time. It's a correct answer for the federal government. The United States government has many levels of government. When I talked about in the beginning that I'm going to address misconceptions in our subconscious, I'm not here to make us feel bad that we're not some kind of amazing, great experts, scholars on the Constitution. It's just to help us realize that for years and years, even generations, we've been taught for many generations, over 100 years, to be tricked into certain misconceptions about our Constitution. The American government is a republic. Now, what that means is that there's multiple levels of authority, and there's delegation of authority that takes place. So you have local municipalities, you have your city government, your county government, your local municipalities, and then you have your state government. And then the next level is the federal government. Another question, this picture here, corporate America. Let's say that the United States was a corporation. Well, actually, we don't have to say that. Unfortunately, there is a corporation in the United States. That's a whole other topic for another time. But imagine this structure like corporate. In a large corporation, as far as organizational structure or an organizational chart, there could be some slight variance. But typically it's going to look something like at the top a CEO. And in this case, we're going to say that this company, that I'm going to say that you, as an individual, you're the owner of said company. You're sole owner. So you don't have shareholders, you don't have a board that you answer to. You're the sole authority and final authority in this company. So CEO and owner. Below CEO, you're typically going to have some VPs. vice president of marketing, vice president of production, and things like that. Below your VPs, you would typically have directors. And below director, you're going to have entry-level manager. So in American government, who is the CEO? The president. I mean, it is executive branch, right? So is it the president that would be CEO? Again, I define CEO as final authority. Who's the final authority in American government? Back here.
The people.
The people. Who here is familiar with the 9th Amendment? The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So anything not delegated is retained. I kind of chuckle to myself, not to be rude, but just in my growing and understanding of the Constitution, I kind of chuckle to myself when I hear, yeah, you're right, I should learn the Constitution because I should learn my rights. Well, we all definitely should learn the Constitution. However, it's not about learning our rights. Your rights are unlimited. You are a sovereign child of God. You are a God in embryo. You're a sovereign individual. Our rights are infinite. Except those that we delegate to government, right? Well, actually, we don't delegate rights. We delegate authority. So we delegate very few powers or authority to government, but we don't give up rights. We retain our rights. And so the point of the 9th Amendment is to reestablish this idea that just because something's not enumerated or defined in the Constitution does not mean that there's not other rights. Who knew that there's an introduction given to the Bill of Rights? So the introduction, or it calls it the preamble to the Bill of Rights, it calls them further declaratory and restrictive clauses to the Constitution. Now, sometimes I will say Bill of Rights just so people understand what I'm talking about, but I really have tried to shy away from calling it Bill of Rights, and I like to call them, as they were introduced, as further declaratory and restrictive clauses to the Constitution. One more question for you. When did women get the right to vote?
They've always had it.
Bingo! First time I've got that answer correct. So in 1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified, Women's Suffrage Amendment. Was there anything in the Constitution that prohibited women from voting? No. In fact, there was some women voting early on. What took place was misconceptions planted in people's minds by corrupt politicians going around saying, wait a second, tap the brakes. Your Constitution doesn't say that you get to vote. Sorry, it's not an enumerated right. That's not how it works. Do you wake up in the morning and flip through your pocket Constitution, try to find anything in there that tells you what brand of toothpaste you get to use? The Constitution's not a grant of our rights. Right now, I want everybody to promise you'll take out of your vocabulary my First Amendment right, my Second Amendment right, your God-given right of free speech, protected under the First Amendment, your God-given right to bear arms, protected by the Second Amendment. So again, coming back to this idea of further declaratory statements. The 19th Amendment was a further declaration. It was added because they wanted to ensure that we didn't make this mistake again. We didn't allow government to come along and try to trick us about how our Constitution works. So I've kind of been trying to start a trend by trying to overcome the mentality, another misconception, that as part of nationalism, we should have national pride. I agree, we should be proud of America. Absolutely. You should also be proud of your state. It can become kind of again, we should be proud of America, but it can also become kind of a dangerous thing to think of ourselves as just one big general body of people. We delegate authority to the federal government through the states. And so instead of just we the people, I've been trying to start a trend of the first 7 words of the Constitution. We the people of the United States. When you look at words of the founders, when they referred to the people, a lot of their writings referred to it as the people of the several states, such as such as such as such, the people of the several states, this, that, or the other. That's how they referred to the people. They wanted to ensure that we didn't buy into this idea that we're just somehow subjects to a great empire called the federal government. By the way, can anybody tell me which part or where in the Constitution the first mention of the word nation is found? Trick question, it's not in there. The word nation is not in the Constitution. Why is that? Are we not a nation? We're a country, but we are a republic forming a union of 50 nations. James Madison gave a statement in the Federalist Papers. I actually kind of wish this was included in the Constitution itself. But he said, the powers delegated by proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Few and what? Defined. Not few and vague. Not few and bends and shapes over time. Not few and too strenuous for the average person to understand. Requires the Supreme Court to tell us what the Constitution says. Defined. If something's defined, why do you need interpretation if it's defined? We forget that I kind of see a mentality that as long as the 3 branches stay in their lane, you know, they're not crossing over on their responsibilities, and they're not trampling on the first 10 amendments. Unfortunately, they just kind of get to do what they want, and you just got to wait until you get to vote the bums out. Sorry, you're stuck with Mitt Romney for 6 years. You just got to wait. So how do we restore liberty? The title of this presentation you saw in the program was Liberty is Power and the Secret to Restore Liberty. So we could address that there's a problem, but simply talking about an issue and just saying, hey, there's a problem, doesn't solve anything. We want to fix it, right? That's what you came in here to find out. Well, back to this idea of we're kind of told, hey, sorry, you're stuck with Mitt for 6 years. Well, we're kind of told that our solutions are just two options. That's all you have. Just 2 options. You can wait till the term is over, vote the bums out, and get a new bum in, or do a lawsuit, just hope and pray it can make it to the Supreme Court. And then we kind of have this image in our mind that the Supreme Court is somehow independent of the federal government, even though they are the federal government. And so we kind of have this idea of, I'm just hoping that the federal government will rule in favor of me and limit itself. I hope that the federal government limits itself. And we're kind of told these are our options. Anybody see a problem with that? Now, am I going to tell you some idea that's made up by Jake? No, I'm here to tell you real solutions from the Constitution. Just real quick, who has heard of the Communist Manifesto? Awesome. I'm actually surprised how many people. Most people kind of know vaguely the name Karl Marx and they know about communism, but many people have not heard of the Communist Manifesto. So, Karl Marx broke it down into 10 planks. I'm not going to go into all these in detail, but I'm just going to read through them really quick, and I want you to kind of check which ones you think are implemented as I go through it. Abolition of private property. Heavy progressive income tax. Abolition of rights of inheritance. Confiscation of property rights. Central bank. Government ownership of communication and transportation. Government ownership of factories and agriculture. Government control of labor. Corporate farms and regional planning. Government control of education. Which ones of these are implemented? Every single one of these. So the next time somebody says, gosh, you're so extreme, believing communism can come here, say, hey, you know what? How about we get it from the horse's mouth? Karl Marx, the author of communism, he wrote 10 planks. Let's go through this. So the next time someone wants to call you extreme, just whip that out on them. What is usurpation? Usurpation is stolen authority. If your car gets stolen, but you still have the title to your car, proving you are the rightful owner of it, does it matter if you have that title, doesn't matter if it was just 24 hours later that it turns up or 3 months later that it turns up? Does that matter at all if you have the title proving you're the owner? No. It doesn't cease to be your property. Write this down. I want you guys to do a little bit of research on Marbury versus Madison, Supreme Court Justice John Marshall. The truth about the role of the Supreme Court, because we're going to be told that precedence supersedes the Constitution. What's the supreme law of the land? The Constitution. Is the Supreme Court the supreme law? They're called supreme, right? The Constitution. I don't care what kind of opinion. Supreme Court gives opinions, not rulings, by the way. And you can check that anytime they issue a statement, it says the opinion of the Supreme Court, the opinion of the dissenting. Says opinion, not ruling, by the way. It is an opinion. They have no such authority to legislate or even to interpret, because again, remember, those powers are defined. The Supreme Court's just supposed to give a decision based on what the Constitution says, not supposed to bend and shape it over time. The reason I talk about Supreme Court and this Marbury versus Madison is because it doesn't matter how long we have been going accepting this. I was talking to somebody recently about how Utah's Constitution defines marriage. That's kind of something unique about our state constitution over others. And ironically, it came around to kick the federal government in the butt because they required we put something in our state constitution about marriage. Can you guess why? Because of polygamy. In order to join the union, they made us put something in our state constitution about prohibiting marriage. But because there was this precedent set about discussing marriage in our state constitution, they later went on to define it even more. And our state constitution says that marriage is defined as between one man and one woman. No other union will be legally recognized. I don't think there's any gray area in that, especially with that last backup statement there. Now, there's a process to amend it, and so people that feel differently, there's a legal process to change that definition or state constitution, but whatever it says, whether leaning this way or that way, we have to follow our state constitution. I was explaining this idea to somebody about how marriage is not an enumerated authority or power for federal government. Therefore, you have to follow what the state says according to the 10th Amendment. And they said, well, the Supreme Court interprets the law, and they, under the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, they're saying that marriage is an equal protection and blah, 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 because we have a living, breathing constitution that bends and shapes the needs of society over time. So, okay. And guys, this is why it's so important we come to understand and know the Constitution, because we could boo-hoo all we want, but is boo-hooing going to change anything if we can't make a legal argument? We have to be able to prove why something's legally wrong. So I said, okay, could you show me in Article 3 of the United States Constitution where it says the Supreme Court can legislate? And hold the thought though, because a lot of times we've all heard the term, they're trying to legislate from the bench. So let me take it a step further. Could you show me anything in Article 3 that says they get to interpret the Constitution? And they were backed up into a corner. We have this precedent set ever since 1808 that the Supreme Court decides. I don't care how long we've been going along unconstitutional. If it's stolen authority, if it's stolen, it's stolen. It doesn't matter how long that car was stolen. If you have the title, if you have the Constitution proving that under the 9th Amendment, anything not delegated is retained. You can prove that something's a stolen authority. It's a usurpation. So it doesn't matter how long we've accepted something if we can prove it's stolen. We must remember that we have to assert ourselves on things that are retained. The hope is in exercising nullification. So nullification, if you bring this up to somebody who's somewhat familiar with constitutional law, they'll say, oh, you're a racist. Why? Because there's this idea that nullification is part of this states' rights movement, and states' rights is something in the South, the racist South that did slavery. And so therefore, you're trying to come back to that day and age of slavery because you want states' rights. But here's a question. Typically, when we speak of nullification, we're talking about states nullifying the federal government. But there's actually a situation where the federal government nullified the states. Nullification is pulling back where something's unconstitutional. Is there anything in the Constitution that granted authority to do slavery? No, absolutely not. So when the southern states were doing slavery and the Union said, nope, not doing that anymore. Who nullified who? The Union nullified the South. And so nullification has got kind of a dirty dogma around it, but nullification is not some kind of new made-up strategy. It is simply asserting and exercising the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that anything not delegated to the federal government falls back in favor to the states and to the people. It's kind of building on this idea that James Madison said of few and defined powers. And that statement he gave, it actually goes on to say those of the states are numerous and indefinite, is what he said. And so how do we practice nullification? Here's just a few interesting statements from some of our founders. Nullification is a remedy against insupportable oppression, James Madison. Every state has a natural right to nullify, Thomas Jefferson. Any law not warranted by the Constitution is a barefaced usurpation. So there are 4 steps to nullifying. The first is non-compliance. You can't get to the next step until you've built up enough momentum in the previous step. Are we going to overturn a federal law, the very last step, if we don't even have momentum or a group of people catching on with something? No. But this is some clear steps we take. We need non-compliance. Somebody asked me in a presentation, okay, but how do you apply to the school boards who just don't listen? Well, pull your kids out of public school. Non-compliance, I'm just not going to comply with your crap. I agree that for the kids that are still in the system, we should fight. We shouldn't let the government just get away with whatever they want, even if there shouldn't be public school, constitutionally speaking. So we should try to work hard to make sure that they're not running away with doing whatever they want in those schools. But non-compliance, somebody said, this doesn't work to everything because it won't work to school boards who don't listen to us. How are you going to practice non-compliance in a school board meeting? Pull your kid out. Don't comply with government. They say, put your kid in public school, don't comply. There's many different situations in which this would apply. But after you're getting a lot of people non-compliant, the next step is acceptance of federal funds. This isn't just states, this is your local government. Your cities, your local municipalities are approached by federal government. They're told, hey, wouldn't it be nice to get your cruisers updated, get new laptops for everybody? Don't you kind of need some equipment updated? Do X, Y, and Z for us, enforce these federal laws for us, and we'll give you some money. Do you know that your local police do not have to enforce federal law? Your local police don't have to. The way that the federal government gets them to enforce it is by attaching strings to money. Who doesn't like free money? So go to your county commission meetings, go to your city council, demand that they stop accepting federal funds. They're going to tell you, we have to though, because the budget requires that we need this little extra boost. But do they need as big a budget if we're reducing by this much how much they have to enforce? Do they really need this big a budget if we're reducing how much they have to enforce? So there's kind of a mental trap there that we have to help them get over. Next would be initiating state law. So that's step 3. Before we're even going to our state legislature and saying, hey, we want XYZ law nullifying this federal act. And the example of this would be marijuana. Okay? I'm not endorsing recreational use of marijuana. But what I am saying is there is not a power the federal government gets to pursue. If it should be outlawed, it needs to be outlawed on the state level, not by federal government. If it needs to be legalized, it needs to be legalized on the state level. Either legal or prohibited on state level. Both is a legal option, and it's up to us, the people, to decide what we want in our community. But it's something done either on your local level or at state level, not federal. And so federal government says marijuana is illegal. Colorado says, no, it's legal. Can they do that? Yup, that is nullification. But before we even try to get a state law passed, we need to build up momentum. We need non-compliance. And then we stop accepting federal funds, because guess what? We could try to pass as many state laws as we want, but if we're taking money from the federal government and that has strings attached, are we going to be able to really enforce our state laws if we're tied to the federal government financially? It's going to be a little bit hard to do that. And then the last step is going to the federal government. Once you have a lot of states on board with something, saying, hey, no, we're pulling power back to the state, then it gets repealed federally. Too many times we try to hope for a trickle-down effect change by hoping for change in DC and get that to trickle down and affect change in Utah. Start with your city council, start with your county. and then your state, and work outward. Where do you have the most influence? Local. Nullification is the solution. And this comes back to the eternal principle that we need self-governance. How can we become exalted beings if we can't self-govern? We are here to learn and to grow, and we need growing opportunity. I want to testify to you that, as I said in the beginning, liberty is not just a principle that's good and relates to the gospel. Liberty is the Lord's plan of salvation, because he desires for us not just to return back, but he desires for us to be saviors on Zion Mount, to be joint heirs with him as exalted beings, to be endowed with power. That requires following a path of proper principles. We already have our freedom, our agency. Freedom is agency, so we already have that agency. We desire something greater, and it requires that we follow a path of principles. And we must exercise those principles. Thanks, everybody.